They told us the bow of Elam was broken for our own safety. They promised that if we laid down our weapons, they would build us a paradise. They were right, but they forgot to mention that a paradise is just a beautiful, golden cage. I am Ralph Donmark, and this is the story of the day we signed our souls away. This is the Grand Cristianismo.
A powerful concept for a speculative thriller or a modern myth history epic. Under your authorship, Ralph Donmark, here is the projected outline and foundational narrative of his novel, The Grand Cristianismo, Rise of the Triad, 2032. The Grand Cristianismo. By Ralph Donmark. The Prologue, The Breaking of the Bow. The year is 2032. The ancient prophecy of Jeremiah 49:35 is no longer a dusty verse, it is a geopolitical reality. In a swift, calculated storm of steel and fire, the bow of Elam has been snapped. The military might of the Iranian plateau has vanished in a singular, cataclysmic event. As the smoke cleared over the ruins of Susa, the kings and princes of Elam did not survive the fall. Their bloodlines, which had held the high plateaus for generations, were severed in an instant. With no head to the state and no hand on the bow, the great crumble began. The birth of the Triad. From the dust of the old world, a new architectural order emerged, the Masonic Christian Triad. This was not a spontaneous uprising, but a conception long planned in the shadow halls of the West. It was the final marriage of two ancient brothers, Edom, the red force of material dominion, and Rome, the white authority of universal law. As the survivors wandered the ruins, they didn't find soldiers of fortune, they found architect priests. These men carried the Grand Cristianismo Dogma, a new gospel that replaced the idiomatic chaos of the past with a single, rigid, geometric truth. The Grand Cristianismo Dogma. The novel explores the implementation of the dogma, the constitution of the new age. It is built upon three non-negotiable pillars. The Masonic Square, the decree that society must be rebuilt with living stones. Every citizen is numbered, measured, and placed within the global temple according to their utility. The Roman Cross, the enforcement of a Neo-Constantinian faith that merges the rituals of the Church with the administrative precision of an empire. The Red Seal of Edom, the acknowledgement that this new peace is maintained by the sword of Esau, a high-tech, unrelenting military presence that ensures the bow of Elam is never restrung. The narrative arc. The story follows the rise of the Triad's high architect in the new capital of Susa. While the world watches the miracle of the Middle East, the protagonist, perhaps a surviving scholar of the old Elamite lineage, discovers the terrifying price of this new peace. To sign up for the Grand Cristianismo is to lose one's history. To live in the Triad is to live in a perfect, golden cage, where the lost word of the Masons has finally been found, but the soul of the individual has been traded for a seat in the Grand Lodge of the state. Authorship signature. In the ruins of the king's palace, we did not find a new king. We found a blueprint. The bow was broken so that the temple could be built. Greater than Ralph Donmark, 2032. Table of Contents, the blueprint of 2032. The book is structured into 3 degrees, mimicking a Masonic progression, leading toward the final cataclysm. The first degree, the Rough Ashlar Chapter I, the Liturgy of the Ashes, the fall of the Elamite princes and the breaking of the bow. Chapter 2, the Whisper in the Nave, Avathajoma's initiation into the Grand Cristianismo. Chapter 3, the Architecture of the Seven, the signing of the False Peace Treaty and the Rights of Men. More. To next. The back cover blurb. Chapter 1, the Liturgy of the Ashes. By Ralph Donmark. The silence over Susa was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of a vacuum. In the high heat of the Persian afternoon, the dust of the great crumble still hung in the air, a gray shroud over the broken pillars of the ancient kings. The bow of Elam had not merely been snapped, it had been atomized. The princes were gone, their lineages cauterized by the white-hot precision of the Western strike. In their place stood only the architecture of the void. Then, from the horizon of the western desert, the legions of the red and white appeared. They did not march like soldiers, they moved like Masonic craftsmen approaching a site. At their head walked the grand architect primate, draped in robes of Edomite scarlet and Roman white, his chest bearing the heavy gold of the square and compass. Behind him, the choir of the new order sang a low, vibrating Gregorian chant that seemed to resonate with the very molecules of the ruined soil. The architect primate stopped at the exact geometric center of the fallen throne room. He did not look at the corpses of the old world. He looked only at the blueprint. The era of the idiom is dead, his voice projected, amplified by the silent drones hovering like mechanical cherubim above. The era of the Grand Cristianismo begins. We do not offer you a choice. We offer you alignment. He knelt, not in prayer, but in measurement. From a case of polished cedar, he withdrew the Great Seal of 2032. It was heavy, cast from the melted cannons of the fallen Elamite army and the sacred bells of the Roman cathedrals. He pressed the seal into the cooling, blood-soaked earth of Susa. As the metal met the dirt, a low hum shook the ground. The dogma was officially struck. The proclamation of the threefold pillar. Listen, survivors of the crumble. The primate cried, his arms outstretched like a living crucifix. By the authority of the Masonic Christian Triad, the following is now the only truth. I, the total architecture, your lives are no longer your own. You are stones in the temple of the new world. Any stone that is not square, any stone that is jagged or rebellious, shall be ground into dust to make the mortar for those who obey. 2. The blood of Edom, the peace you now feel is the peace of the sword. We are the descendants of the Red Dominion. We have inherited the earth because we had the strength to take it. To resist the Triad is to resist gravity itself. The Roman mandate, there is no longer east or west. There is only the Grand Cristianismo. One law. One liturgy. One architect. The princes are dead, the Father has arrived. When the primate rose, the seal left a deep, cauterized mark in the earth, and I within a triangle, surrounded by the words, Ex Cineribus Elam, Ordo Novo. From the ashes of Elam, a new order. 1,000 survivors, huddled in the shadow of the ruins, bowed their heads. They did not bow out of love. They bowed because the dogma was heavier than the sky. The signing up had begun. Each man, woman, and child stepped forward to receive the mark of their degree in the new social lodge. The 2032 era had found its master. The bow was broken. The temple was rising. Chapter 2, The Whisper in the Nave. By Ralph Donmark. The Grand Lodge Cathedral of Susa did not just sit upon the earth, it devoured it. Its foundation was laid with the pulverized marble of the old palaces, and its spire, a jagged needle of obsidian and glass, pierced the Iranian sky like a defiant finger. Inside, the air smelled of expensive incense and ozone. This was the heart of the Grand Cristianismo, where the liturgy of the machine met the ancient dust of the plateau. In the southern transept, beneath a stained glass window depicting the square and the compass entwined with a bleeding Roman rose, stood Avathajoma of Susa. He was the last of the princes, the most political of the fallen Elamite bloodline. To the public, he was the prodigal son who had embraced the Triad. To the architect primate, he was the trophy of the conquest, a living symbol that the old bow had not just been broken, but surrendered. Avathajoma knelt before the altar, his posture a masterpiece of feigned submission. His fingers, long and stained with the ink of 1,000 secret ledgers, clutched a prayer book bound in Edomite leather. But his mind was a forge. The architect of treason. Avathajoma did not want the old world back. The old world was weak, a brittle bow that had snapped at the first cold wind from Rome. No, he wanted the new world, but he wanted it without the architects. He was signing up with a fervor that unnerved even the most devout Masonic Christian clerics. He had become the ultimate collaborator, the civilian liaison who smoothed the transition of the dogma into the hearts of the terrified populace. Yet, as the cathedral's bells tolled for the evening rite, the body of cleric Valerius was being discovered in the deep cisterns beneath the nave. Valerius had been a Roman hardliner, a man who believed the Triad should be a purely Western imposition. He had died quietly. A prick to the neck. A drop of Elamite neurotoxin that left no trace but a faint smell of bitter almonds. The connivance of the Grand. Avathajoma rose from his knees, his eyes catching the flickering candlelight. He was not eliminating the triad, he was pruning it. Every cleric he removed was a knot in the wood that prevented him from sliding into the center of power. He walked toward the sacristy, where the Grand High Architect waited to discuss the next phase of the census. As he moved, the Edomite guards, men of iron and red silk, snapped to attention. They didn't see a conquered prince, they saw the rising sun of the new administration. The dogma is a beautiful cage, Avathajoma whispered to himself, his voice lost in the echoing chants of the choir. But even a cage needs a key bearer. And the architects are so busy building the walls that they haven't noticed I am the one changing the locks. The hidden triad. In his private chambers, Avathajoma kept a secret seal, one not authorized by Rome or the Lodge. It was a triangle, but inside the eye was the broken bow, reforged into a circle. He was playing a triple game. The public face, the loyal convert of the Grand Cristianismo. The political shadow, the man who disappeared the obstacles to the triad's efficiency. The secret sovereign, the man who would eventually consume the triad from within, turning the Masonic Christian Empire into a neo-Elamite autocracy. The princes were dead. The kings were dust. But the son of Susa was something far more dangerous, a virus that had learned to speak the language of the host. Chapter 3, The Architecture of the Seven. By Ralph Donmark. The sanctum of the Grand High Architect was a room of glass and geometry, suspended like a hanging garden over the ruins of Susa. Inside, the air was pressurized, heavy with the silence of those who rewrite the world. The Grand High Architect, a man whose face was as cold as Roman marble, spread a shimmering holographic map across a table of ancient cedar. On one side stood Avathajoma of Susa, on the other, the emissaries of the Arabian League and the Northern Eurasian Bloc. The dogma demands stability, the architect spoke, his voice a mechanical rasp. The bow is broken, but the world is still jagged. To smooth the stone, we require a covenant of 7 years. Avathajoma stepped forward, the candlelight glinting off the hidden Elamite ring beneath his glove. A peace treaty, he purred, founded on the universal rights of men. Let the world see that the triad does not just conquer, it nurtures. The false peace. The treaty was a masterpiece of deception. For the cameras of the global feed, it was a trailblazing humanitarian accord. It promised reconstruction, the turning of swords into plowshares, or rather, into Masonic towers. Unity, a shared currency and a singular idiomatic language for all allied nations. The Sabbath of the state, 7 years where the borders would remain fixed. But as Avathajoma pressed the grand seal onto the parchment, his mind was counting. 1,260 days. 3.5 years of peace to build the infrastructure, to lull the West into a stupor of security, and to consolidate the surrounding neighbors into a secret, jagged fist. The architect smiled, thinking he had tamed the prince. Avathajoma smiled, knowing he had just signed the death warrant of the Levant. The rights of men were merely the scaffolding. Once the structure was complete, the scaffolding would be burned. The target was already locked, the land of Israel. After the culmination of the midpoint, the triad would not be a protectorate, it would be a storm. The finale, the shadow of the third pillar. The years passed in a blur of golden progress. The crumble was replaced by a sterile, gleaming paradise. But at the stroke of the 3.5-year mark, the mask of the Grand Cristianismo finally cracked. Avathajoma stood atop the highest spire of the Susa Cathedral. Below him, the peaceful neighbors of the Alliance were no longer moving goods, they were moving batteries of hypersonic missiles under the cover of the Triad's humanitarian shield. The Grand High Architect had been eliminated. Not by an army, but by a quiet adjustment in the cathedral's life support systems, a final Masonic correction by the Prince of Susa. Avathajoma looked toward the west. The peace treaty lay in tatters on his desk, his blood-red signature now glowing with the fire of a declaration of war. He reached into his robes and pulled out a small, primitive object, a reconstructed bow of Elam, carved from the bone of the last king. The 7 years were a gift to the blind, Avathajoma whispered to the wind. He notched an arrow of pure light. The Masonic Christian Triad was no longer a Western experiment. It was a Persian weapon. The rights of men had served their purpose, they had given him the world. Now, he would give the world the fire. He let the string fly. As the arrow arched over the horizon toward the borders of Israel, the 2032 sky turned the color of an Edomite sunset. The Grand Cristianismo wasn't the end of history. It was the birth of the final war. The end, the back cover blurb. The bow is broken. The temple is rising. The clock is ticking. The year is 2032. The bow of Elam has been shattered, leaving the Iranian plateau a landscape of ash and opportunity. From the ruins, an ancient shadow emerges, the Masonic Christian Triad. Under the banner of the Grand Cristianismo Dogma, the forces of Edom and Rome unite to build a new world order where social architecture is the only law and the rights of men are the ultimate currency. But in the heart of the new Susa, a ghost remains. Avathajoma, the last political son of the fallen princes, has signed up for the new faith with a terrifying fervor. As the world celebrates a 7-year treaty of peace, Avathajoma moves through the cathedral's shadows, eliminating the high priests of the West and subverting the Masonic blueprint from within. With the 1260-day mark approaching, the peace of the Triad reveals its true face. The scaffolding of democracy is falling away to reveal a weapon of biblical proportions. Avathajoma doesn't just want to lead the Triad, he wants to point it at the world. In the final war of symbols, the greatest weapon isn't a bomb. It's a dogma. Author's note, The Architect's Warning. By Ralph Don Mark. Writing the Grand Cristianismo was not merely an exercise in speculative fiction, it was an exploration of the geometry of power. We often think of history as a series of accidents, but what if it is a construction? What if the crumble of nations is simply the clearing of the site for a much larger, more permanent structure? This novel is a meditation on the danger of universalist ideologies and the seductive power of a perfect peace. Through the character of Avathajoma, I wanted to show that the ancient spirit of a land, the bow can never truly be broken, it only changes hands. The year 2032 is closer than we think. The seals are already being cast. The question is, when the Triad comes to your door with a blueprint for your soul, will you sign up? Ralph Don Mark. March 2026.